Hey everyone, this is chapter 7 of part 1 of Bruno Rizzi's The Bureaucratization of the World. Chapter 7 is titled Bourgeois Restoration. Bourgeois restoration is the bête noire of scientific Marxists. Bête noire means black beast, I believe. He wanders like a ghost about the camp of Agrement, disturbs the Marxist sleep, and fills the Marxist dreams with anguish. The Marxists are all obsessed with the fear of seeing the bourgeoisie reappear, following a transformation of the bureaucracy. It is an excellent argument, especially for us, especially as a bogey, to terrify those who won't hear of defending the USSR. For us, it seems a bit hard to maintain, by the same argument, that the economic process can retrace its steps. Marx never said anything about it, and history records a steady growth in production, whilst, at the same time, more progressive economic organizations eliminate the old ones. Our gentlemen declare that the present system of production in the USSR is better than the bourgeois system, but the ghost is still there. It is pointless to give a string of quotations. Their whole literature is full of it, with Trotsky in the front rank. But Neville goes further, and we must quote him, even if it is a pity to waste time on so trite an argument. Quote, "The counter-revolutionary wave of terror that the bureaucracy unleashes on the railways, factories, and farms, shooting hundreds of recalcitrant workers and functionaries, springs from the new constitution in the hope it holds out to certain social strata behind which world capitalism lies in wait. But the bureaucracy which has nurtured this restoration runs the risk of not itself being in the saddle. That is what reveals the contradictory and ambiguous nature of Soviet bureaucracy, what undermines the foundation of the Soviet bureaucracy's very existence: collective state ownership of the land, of the means of production, of heavy industry, of construction, and of commerce." End quote. Pierre Neville. "Capitalism lies in wait and bureaucracy is about to commit harikari!" "Sleep easy, gallant knight, the bureaucracy has quite different intentions!" And further on, Neville adds, quote, "The bureaucracy has had voted in a new constitution guaranteeing the bureaucracy's privileges. The bureaucracy has assassinated almost all the old Bolshevik leaders, not trusting to their loyalty. It has given unprecedented guarantees to the diplomacy of the League of Nations. And yet in spite of all it remains linked, not only in its origin, but also in the way it functions, in the way it is recruited, in the way it is reproduced, in its level of consumption, to the ranks of the propertied class, as defined at the time of the October Revolution." End quote. Pierre Neville. These two quotations are enough to ensure that even the most humble worker purses his lips and refuses to risk a fingernail for the country of, quote, "the good life." End quote. But the scientific Marxists die hard. There they stand, erect and impassive, defending an imaginary breach, waving their swords at the phantom-filled air. The October Revolution awaits a second edition. Neville's foresight goes so far as to specify the form of the economy after the Restoration. Quote, "Given the fundamental difference between state industry in the USSR and monopoly capitalism under imperialism, it is clear that if private capitalism is to be restored in the key sectors of production, the bureaucracy itself will also have to be broken up. Then we shall rise up in the USSR, then we shall see rise up in the USSR social classes, which from their very economic mode of existence will be prey for the bourgeoisie and even for European fascism." End quote. End quote. The bureaucracy, because of its economic form of existence, is already a descendant of the bourgeoisie, and fascism is nothing other than its twin. Calm yourself, Monsieur Neville. The Soviet bureaucracy will never disintegrate, especially in the monopolies. But as well as monopolies, we have long had state capitalism more and more widely applied in all countries. It seems to us illogical that monopolies should be restored, being an economic form, prior to state capitalism itself! Trotsky taught that Soviet bureaucracy is the, quote, core of clerks, end quote, of imperialism. But his pupils go even further backward into history to monopolies. Even if the USSR were to be overtaken by the anti-Comintern, we see no reason why the conqueror should want to destroy an economic system of the kind which they themselves are presently building, an enormous sacrifice both on the national and international level. But apart from that, this economic system makes clear to us why they have appeared and why they have conquered. If the totalitarian states were to overthrow the USSR, it is our guess that the political structure would be maintained, and that this time the Soviet bureaucracy would truly become Japanese, German, Italian, quote, clerks, end quote. Did feudalism ever want to restore slavery? Did capitalism ever feel nostalgia for feudalism? And did not the famous French Restoration establish the uncontested rule of the bourgeoisie? That was its raison d'etre, its historic task. Napoleon took advantage of it to enact his crazy megalomaniac projects, but always as a defender of and propagandist for the, quote, sacred principles. The whole analogy that Trotsky draws between authoritarian regimes today and Bonaparte's regime fails to serve his purpose. There is no comparison between Bonaparte's developments in the 19th century and what is happening today in Russia, Germany, and Italy. The Bonapartism of Napoleon I and Napoleon III left the social and economic basis intact, whilst the alleged Bonapartists of the 20th century were tearing to shreds the basic tissue of society. The USSR of the bureaucracy found property already nationalized, so far as it has maintained it. If we dismiss all this as Bonapartism, we run the risk of providing historical justification for the Stalinist phenomenon. Trotsky has always been good at, quote, slogans, unquote. Trotsky has an innate skill and gets away with it even when he sows confusion. Trotsky has found a dazzling analogy to explain why he puts the label, quote, worker state, end quote, on Stalin's bureaucratic collectivism. Here it is, quote, is the USSR a worker state? The USSR is a state that relies on the property relations created by the proletarian revolution and led by a worker bureaucracy in the interest of a new privileged stratum. It can be called a worker state almost in the same way, in spite of the enormous difference in scale, as a trade union, although led and betrayed by its opportunists, i.e. by the agents of capital, can be called a workers' organization. End quote, Trotsky. Thus it follows that a workers' bureaucracy economically exploits its masters, something that has never in this world happened, and to give this an air of reality, Trotsky reverts to one of those non sequiturs, of which he always has such a horror, comparing the state to a trade union. It reminds us of the racist whose name we have forgotten, who, to prevent crossing Aryans with Semites, instructs us that a dog makes love to a bitch, a tomcat to a female cat, a lion to a lioness, etc. Craipeau, Yvan Craipeau, if you don't know, we kind of independently developed a bureaucratic collectivist conception of the USSR early on, challenging Trotsky's degenerate worker state. And if you hear me talk before, I'd be very much curious to see like if there's any relationship between Craipeau and the Chelou Montal, I believe. I always fuck up the name, with the Castoriadis of the Four tendency in the Fourth International prior to their breaking and forming the Socialisme Barbarie group. Anyway, Craipeau, throughout his article, is justifiably indignant and strains at the leash. It was for us a great pleasure, as it was for Robinson Crusoe when he found his man Friday, to find this rara avis. Even so, we think Craipeau's conception of the Soviet bourgeoisie smells a little too much of the, quote, bourgeois, end quote. It is natural that the new class should give itself up to pleasure as to all ruling and exploiting classes, but Craipeau need not fear either the accumulation or inheritance of wealth. It is a question of property in the means of consumption, not of production. The bureaucracy is not like an individual bourgeois proprietor. He would have displayed his possessions, but today property is historically so near to being socialized, that is to say, so near to disappearing as identifiable property, retaining only the characteristic of being a means of production, that as well as taking a collective form, is hidden and denied by its actual possessors. The most important thing for the bureaucrat is surplus value, but he has to consume that surplus value on the sly. And why does Craipeau expect the return of the bourgeoisie? Since Craipeau admits the existence of a new non-bourgeois class, at least Craipeau does not consider it as yet being bourgeois, why should Craipeau think it would immediately be changed back again into a bourgeoisie? If a new class has been formed, it is because, either historically or incidentally, that class is called upon to play a role in the historic rise of humanity. We think the bureaucracy has the task, or has taken the task upon the bureaucracy's self, of organized production on the basis of collective ownership, planning the economy within the framework of the state, leaving to socialism only the task of, quote, nationalization, end quote, at the international level, and the problem of socialist distribution. Craipeau is also wrong about fascism. Fascism was acting for the bourgeoisie, and fascism tried to continue with a capitalist economy, but the necessities of economic development forced on fascism conditions even more authoritarian than did its own political movement, obliging it to move rapidly towards the totalitarian state. To fear such conclusions is to play into one's opponent's hands, to wind the film of reformism backwards. You accuse Trotsky of exactly that. Why do you do it yourself? Does the hypothesis of the revolution betrayed, which you cited, really have a historical meaning? Yes, if the author had followed his hypothesis with the words, quote, but this hypothesis is still premature, end quote. Quote, the proletariat has still to say the last word, end quote. Parenthesis, my, bracket, Rizzi's, and bracket, emphasis on premature, end parenthesis. Having admitted the existence of a new class in the USSR, chasms open before the Marxist mind, but gulfs are not avoided by closing one's eyes. One must first drink the cup of bitterness to the dregs. Only then is it possible to take up the thread again and to wind it correctly. Sorry, 1 second. This PDF is being difficult. God damn it. There we are. Okay, so that's the end of Chapter 7 of Bruno Rizzi's The Bureaucratization of the World, Part 1.